Welcome to this podcast on digital responsibility. There's a vibrant community across the world at the moment driving forward corporate digital responsibility, which includes a range of aspects from digital ethics, digital for the environment, sustainability, digital well-being, inclusion, accessibility, and more. My name is Rob Price, one of the founders of Corporate Digital Responsibility back in 2017. If you'd like to know more, have a look at the website corporatedigitalresponsibility.net. Welcome to Season 2 and Episode 5 of the Corporate Digital Responsibility podcast, and I'm delighted to be joined tonight by Bob Wigley, author of the recent book of Born Digital, but probably also the longest LinkedIn profile I think I've read in my time looking at LinkedIn. So Bob, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a bit more about how you came to write the book, but the things that came before.
Well, in terms of what came before, I guess I spent 25 years as a banker, ending up as the European chairman of Merrill Lynch, on the board of the Bank of England during the financial crisis. Did some work for government around forming the Green Investment Bank Commission at the start of the kind of promotion of investment in renewables. Wrote a report for Boris on the future of London when he was mayor, and left banking in 2009 after the GFC. And since then, I've been backing young entrepreneurs in cutting edge technology businesses. Today, I chair an organization called UK Finance, which represents the banking and finance sector in the UK. I have investments in 6 or 7 technology businesses where I help what I call youngsters, i.e. younger than me, CEOs try and grow their businesses. And then I do some philanthropic and academic work.
That's brilliant. And I mean, I heard you talk about the book Born Digital just a few weeks ago. And I've got 3 teenage kids, so it kind of clearly resonated in terms of my experience of watching them grow up. But what brought you to? It's a lot of effort to write a book. So what was the thing that really triggered the desire to kind of put the effort, and indeed the effort into the research for it? Because that was a big part of it, I think.
Yeah, so first of all, you're absolutely right. It is more effort than I expected, and I am now full of awe for authors. If you have to, or you do make a living from writing books, it must be incredibly hard work. So good on authors. So what it was really watching my own 3 adolescent children growing up and seeing how technology affected the development of their personalities and affecting their view of the world, and realizing how fundamentally different from my generation that was. And then I had a New Year's resolution a couple of years ago to, as part of my work, sort of backing young entrepreneurs, to meet a Generation Z entrepreneur every business day for a year. I actually met over 200. And it was those meetings which cemented my view that Generation Z is not incrementally different from ours. It because of its relationship with technology, partly, it is 180 degrees different from ours. And I wanted to kind of, to use your expression earlier on, join up the dots for people as I saw it, because I think a lot of people in our generation don't understand quite what a massive change it is. So I wanted to kind of, pull that together. Then, of course, I started researching my ideas and discovered that there was practically a book on every single chapter heading that I'd come up with. So I ended up reading 35 books, which is why there are 515 references in the book. And I've read probably 200 government reports and charity reports on adolescent well-being, and then sat down and wrote the book.
I'm kind of intrigued in the sense of I've heard somebody. I went to my daughter's school, and there was an academic talking about the balance between managing their time online and how to intervene or not to intervene. And one of the battles I've always had is I can't look at it through my lens as a 50-something-year-old who kind of grew up without these technologies. I need to kind of enable them to grow the way that they spot. Not enforce kind of my ways of the 1980s on what they see or how they see the world. So what did you find out about balance in that journey?
So that issue that you raise, I think is absolutely fundamental, because I would say the central tension in just about every family I know is how the parent is trying to limit the child's screen time because they're worried about what their kids are doing on screen. And there's a sort of fundamental misunderstanding, because all screen time is not equal, and all screen time is definitely not bad. And indeed, all users are not equal. So let me unpack that a little bit. So if your child is just watching a film and is not simultaneously sending messages on Snapchat, half looking at Instagram, possibly playing a game on the side, just watching a film, nothing wrong with that. If they're educating themselves and not doing any of those other things, probably nothing wrong with that. And so when you look at the amount of time Generation Z spends on screen, which is probably anything from 7 to 11 hours a day, you mustn't just say, well, that's 11 hours and it's all bad. You've got to look at what they're doing. Now, if they are idly chilling and scrolling, as they call it, on Instagram between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., and that's probably not good, because social media is designed to be negative. It's late at night, the person is tired, they can pick up very negative influences and worse. If they're gaming for 5 hours a day plus, that's probably not good either. So it's not about screen time, it's about what they're doing when they're on screen. And secondly, as I said, it's also about the fact that all users are not equal. Some kids are more resilient to what they see online. Others, if they were going to be vulnerable in the offline world, could be even more vulnerable in the online world. So it's a bit about what they're doing when they're there, and it's a bit about understanding the individual and therefore how vulnerable they may be to what they're subjected to.
And I think one of the things that you said early on there was very much the point about if they were just watching the film. Well, of course they don't, do they? Because kind of the concept of multiple screens and multiple engagements in parallel has been something that certainly kind of we looked at from a technology standpoint a number of years ago. But the impact of that and immediacy and attention. I mean, even the other day I walked into the room, my son was watching, well, he claimed watching something on the television, but actually he was just kind of using Snapchat and chatting with people. So, and again, I'm not saying that that's wrong, but it's about what's harmful versus necessarily what's a judgment about, is that a good use of time?
Well, the central issue there is what I describe as digital bees. They're like digital bees sort of snacking on multiple information pots. And they sort of dart from honey pot to honey pot. And that's fine. So they're sort of learning to multitask. Now, what the scientists would tell you is that actually there's no such thing as multitasking. There's just serial tasking. And that actually multitasking is not as efficient as concentrated attention on one task. And the issue is the following. In the AI world, where basic jobs will disappear and the only jobs that will be left for humans are the complex ones, are we teaching our kids to multitask and not be able to deep listen, deep attend, deep watch, and focus and concentrate just at the very moment when actually those are the skills that they will need to survive in an AI-dominated world? That's the central question.
And I think in many fields, I mean, to take a completely different field for a moment, I had a conversation last week. I'm on the advisory board for the restoration of a classical garden. And we were talking about expertise and how do you get Generation Z interested in things that actually the expertise level is not necessarily there as kind of was 50 years ago, when there was that deep obsession, understanding of technical expertise, whether we were talking plants or whether we were talking technology. Do you feel that there's a risk of losing that, losing the ability to have people who are deep experts in whatever field it is that they choose? Are we, in a sense, dumbing ourselves down by this immediacy and almost desire for fulfillment on a kind of repeated basis rather than?
There's absolutely no question that we are. Now, as I said, all users are not equal. So you will have some people who by their nature are more obsessed about a particular subject and will always want to get into the detail. And that's, they're going to exist in all worlds. And thank God, that's a good thing. But I think for the average, yes, I call the scenario that I see in my book the distraction crisis, because I think that what our devices do is, consistently distract us onto the next thing that the big tech companies want us to pay attention to. It's not what we want to pay attention to, it's what they want us to pay attention to. And that is a danger.
And I think I seem to remember when we were talking about this kind of previously, we had there was a discussion on the call around productivity. So what was the impact on productivity through that constant distraction? And certainly as Gen Z moves into the workplace, and who knows what the workplace looks like actually kind of post-pandemic, but do you also see that as a challenge in terms of the adjustment to spaces that are going to require people to have a stronger attention span than maybe that they have grown up being used to?
Well, there is
That's
no doubt.
completely different.
The scientists will tell you that, as I said, that multitasking is a myth.
Yeah.
You know, human brain is simply not programmed to effectively multitask. So you'll be mainly concentrating on one thing and partly distracted by one or two other things, and that means you're not doing the first thing to 100% of your ability, and the net addition of all that is not as good as doing one thing in a concentrated fashion, then moving on to the next thing. I mean, I think that's what the science will tell you. So yes, I think there's no doubt about that.
Certainly, when I kind of talked about this a few years ago, I think kind of we were at a point where addiction had been extended to the disorder of game addiction. So that was clearly defined, and people were being able to be treated for that. Do you think that, or in the conversations that you've had, has that extended out to be actually more about the way in which we use the devices? So not just games, but the fact that these platforms are designed to engage us for long periods of time, and in the same way that a game was designed to do. Is the phone addiction now a disorder as well?
Yes, you're spot on, Rob. So I would say that the social media platforms have taken the best techniques developed by the best neuroscientists who made gaming addictive, and have taken some of those techniques and applied them to the social media platforms. And, you know, let's face it, their ambition in life is to keep your eyeballs focused on their platform for as long as possible. And if you do get distracted away onto something else, to re-attract you with a ping or a buzz or something else that attracts your attention, vibration, to get you back to their platform, because what they're trying to do is sell your eyeballs to and the attention that comes with it to advertisers. So yes, absolutely, they're designed to be, if not addictive, compulsive, for compulsive use.
So I think my question then is how does it change? I mean, the focus of corporate digital responsibility was very much trying to think about a corporate responsibility to create more positive outcomes for society, to address some of the challenges around automation, sustainable automation, to understand what the future of work might be. What's the trigger point for this to be different?
So I think the big danger is the potential damage this is doing to the adolescent brain that's growing up in the face of this distraction and negativity. And I'm afraid, whilst there is no proven causal link and the evidence is mixed, it cannot be a coincidence, in my view, that during the 10 years that this technology has become ubiquitous in every aspect of our lives, whether it's educating ourselves, shopping, gathering information, traveling, politicking, building, running a business. So at the same, over that same decade, adolescent well-being has declined, and rates of anxiety, loneliness, unhappiness, depression, and ultimately, sadly, self-harm and suicide have increased very substantially. I don't believe that can be a coincidence. And I think what we need to do is reset our relationship with technology, to understand the relationship better, with a view to protecting our children's brains.
And is that regulation? Is that government control? Is that businesses deciding that it's not sustainable the way that it is today? Is it consumer pressure?
So it's all of those things. I don't think there is a silver bullet. So let's start with taking responsibility ourselves. So in theory, and by the way, from my interviews with Generation Z, they recognize the concept of digital overload and distraction. And some of them actually are quite good at disciplining themselves. Literally talking to someone this afternoon, he said to a student at the LSE, and he said, I leave my phone in my bathroom. I don't take it into my bedroom. I try and read a book for an hour before I go to sleep and not look at my phone, because otherwise I end up, on it for 3 hours till 2 in the morning. So, some of them can self-regulate, but I would say that's a pretty small percentage. And truthfully, if you have on one side of the screen a half-developed adolescent brain, one of them, and on the other side of the screen you have 100 of the world's best neuroscientists, I wouldn't say that was a massively fair fight. So I think expecting widespread and comprehensive self-regulation is unrealistic. The next thing, of course, is that parents and educators can help. So I would argue that just as we have sex education in the national curriculum, so we should have something called responsible internet use. And I would argue actually it's far more relevant at a far younger age to every single child than sex education will be, quite some time later, hopefully. But we don't do that. That isn't part of the national curriculum, bizarrely. And I think parents, and I don't, by the way, hold myself out as a role model here. I think I was not a good parent in this respect, need to start engaging themselves in their children's online world. So what we tend to do is say to our kids, what did you do today? And you'll get some story about going to the park and playing football or meeting John for a game of tennis or whatever. What we don't do, at least in my case, and I think in many people's cases, is say, okay, well, for the 3 hours you were on your phone between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. on Snapchat, as a matter of interest, without prying, kind of who are you talking to? What sort of things, were going on? What kind of issues came up? We don't answer those questions. So we think it's sort of being nosy, but actually, often the adolescent wouldn't particularly, because that is the world they live in. And they make no distinction between the online and the offline world. There is no distinction for them. It's all a blur. And so we do need to engage ourselves more in their online world. Then you move to the software designers, who could, if they were so minded, design these products to be less addictive. You could then move to the big tech companies, who themselves could, I think, find a better balance between simply making profit and keeping your attention for the benefit of their advertisers and, as it were, societal purpose. But I don't have to say I don't see much sign of that happening. A lot of these companies are stuck in the quarterly earnings race, and that is what fundamentally drives them. I think also they have governance issues, because a lot of these companies are quite heavily controlled by relatively small numbers of people, or indeed one person. And I don't think that's good. And then finally, you end up, I'm afraid, with the inevitable requirement for regulation, which is why the UK government this year has brought in what's now, I think, called the Online Safety Bill, but as known to everybody in the industry as the Online Harms Bill, which, by the way, for which the UK government, I think, deserves, a gold star, because it is truly world-leading, groundbreaking legislation in its ambition.
I mean, I agree with the things that you say. It is a hugely complex area. My personal experience of bringing up 3 kids is it is difficult. I've always made the effort to try and understand the platforms that they use, because I think it at least helps to understand how they operate, how they work. I've even played various games with them at times to try and interact with some of them. But the thought of them actually telling me what they were doing on them, I can hear them resisting that to some degree. So I can imagine that. I'm really
just to interrupt you for a second. So one quick interesting statistic that I came across when I was writing the book, in a survey of Generation Z, 54% of them said if their parents really knew what went on social media, they would be a lot more worried than they are, which is quite an interesting statistic.
Yeah.
The second thing to mention is Sonia Livingston, who's a professor at LSE, says that this central tension that exists in most family households about screen time. She says you've got to get off the concept of what she calls police and restrict, meaning just trying to stop them being on a particular thing or screen. That's not what it's about. It's actually about understanding what they're doing when they're there, and trying to encourage them to do good things online, and trying to avoid the places where there might be pitfalls. It's not about police and restrict. It's about understanding and guiding.
And I completely agree with that. And I mean, two things. I mean, my son is dyslexic. One of the things that kind of we used when he was much younger was online games as a way of getting him into interacting with other people and having to type, and actually that was really valuable for him as he continued to develop. And of course, as we've all seen, the platforms have been hugely valuable in the pandemic, simply as a way of enabling them to keep in touch with their friendship circles. So there is, as you've said, there are positive things, and I'm really interested in the point you made around schools and understanding how the curriculum can more effectively support, because again, from my experience, the kids kind of listen to what happens at school. They might not listen to me, but they'll listen to their teachers.
So the government, in fairness to the government, our government, the other thing it's done in parallel with the Online Harms Bill and actually the Age Assurance Code, which we could come back to in a minute, is introduce one module in the national curriculum as part of something called relationship education. And that module does touch on the difference between on and offline relationships, and it does cover some of the pitfalls of online relationships. So they have made a start, but I would argue that comprehensive module on responsible internet use, which also covered issues around the negativity of social media and the self-esteem issues that can arise, covers things like cyberbullying, covered hate speech, covered the dangers of porn or the risks of addiction to porn and what it could do to you. I mean, I think there are a whole range of things we should be telling our adolescent children about that we're not.
So it seems to be one of the things that has begun to have an impact in terms of at least waking organisations up to the need to do things is where there is reputational damage that's associated with the things that go wrong. So we've seen it around data, we'll see it around AI and the algorithms on the back of, for example, the EU AI regs that kind of were put out recently. So I guess my question is that the only real trigger that's going to drive change? If an organisation suffers kind of reputational damage because something really, really bad does happen that has a cascade effect that forces change, or are there some shining lights out there of organisations that want to do it differently and therefore effectively people just migrate away by choice? Or is it the mix again?
I'm afraid I don't see much positive sign of a real intent to address the issue of adolescent well-being. I just don't. Indeed, I mean, and I think we should stay away from names, but one of the big social media platforms has recently introduced the idea of a separate area for under 13s, which was met with absolute horror by parental communities and adolescent wellbeing charities around the world, because they just see it as a way of capturing kids younger and addicting them to that platform, and have little confidence that the content would be wholly age appropriate. And I think that leads into another big issue, which is, and it's related to data, which is anonymity on the web. So we require people, when they go into a shop selling alcohol, to have ID. If you want to go into a nightclub, you need ID. If you want to travel on an airplane, you need ID. If you want to gamble, you need ID. But we're allowed to roam around the internet, and our children are allowed to roam around the internet without identifying themselves or proving their age. And I just don't understand why anybody ever thought that was a good idea. I mean, to give you a couple of obvious examples, it enables the child who is under 13 to be on a platform that is very clearly designed in terms of its content for over 13s. Some would argue that content is probably more appropriate to over 18s, but let's just keep it at 13 for now.
Yeah.
And we know that children lie by exaggerating their age to get onto these platforms younger. Yeah. We also know, sadly, from the surveys, that a lot of parents lie on their children's behalf or aid and abet their children in lying about their age, which is sad. I think the second thing is it enables older people to pretend to be younger people and then engage with those younger people, and we know what then happens. So I don't know why anybody thinks that's a good idea, and I think we need to grip it. I think we need to require people to identify themselves to the platform when they sign up. Now, so here's the issue: people want to be able to say things on the internet without using their own name, and I actually don't have a problem with that. I don't mind you having, Rob Price having a platform in the name of John Blogs. What matters, though, is that the platform knows that you're actually Rob Price. And why does that matter? Because if you then go and use hate speech, or you racially abuse someone, or you cyberbully someone, or God forbid, you try and groom a child, and that person then complains about you to the platform, if the platform doesn't know who you actually are, because you've used a false name or a false email address, or even worse, a cloned modem, false IP address, then they can't do anything about it. They can't report you to law enforcement, and there can be no comeback. And I just don't know why anybody thinks that's a good idea.
No, I completely agree. Interestingly, a couple of weeks ago, Ken Banks, who from Yoti, and Yoti kind of very much focused around authentication of things like age, etc., but with a very strong sense of purpose around the way in which that data is used. But I agree, it's the auditability of it. It's being able to kind of prove where that proof is needed. So I guess my question is still
just on that, given the focus of your listeners on this subject of corporate digital responsibility. So one of the issues that the platforms will throw back at you is, absent the requirement legally for the public to identify themselves, although of course you could just the platform just could require you to do it, but they don't. Okay, they say, well, it's not a legal requirement, so I'm not going to do it. The issue is that they then say is, well, it's actually very difficult to tell whether someone is 13 or 14 or 16 or 17 or 18 or 19, and that's true. It is difficult. It can be difficult. So I'm working with a company in Switzerland that has developed something called multimodal dynamic private age assurance. Now, sounds a bit of a package. What that does is the following: it sits on your phone as an app, and it reviews multiple images through your camera. It reviews multiple voice messages of your voice, and it triangulates between the two to calculate your age. And one of the problems with some of the systems that people like Yoti use is they tend to pick on one image. Sorry, no, they use one image. They use one piece of voice potentially, and they're using one or the other. So what this is doing is massively increasing the probability of getting your age correct by doing it on multiple pieces of information and triangulating between image and voice. And this, I think, is a really exciting development. And the third aspect of it, which is the crucial part, is the private part, because this product will sit on the phone and nothing that it's looked at or listened to will leave the phone. The only thing that will leave the phone is the conclusion about your age. And that's a big deal because of course, the platforms don't want multiple pictures of children on their servers for reasons, that are obvious.
Yeah.
And so this is a very exciting development. And I'm fairly confident that within 12 months, we can build something to industrial scale that will be an absolute game changer in terms of age assurance.
And maybe that is the hope then, in terms of whether it's, I mean, there are a number of organisations that do things of a similar nature, but that putting the trust back in the individual in the way in which they engage through that platform, and verifying to whatever kind of degree that you can using technologies of that nature, at least will drive change. Because in a sense, as you say, it's all too easy for people to say things when they don't feel that it can be tracked back to them. So the more that kind of that can change, the hopefully
the better. Yes,
the
I mean,
better.
just to comment on what you said, I mean, there's no one doing this, which is triangulating between voice and image, doing it on multiple pieces of image and voice, and doing it privately. This is literally a groundbreaking new technology. The company, by the way, is called Privately, based in Switzerland. I think it's a really interesting technology.
And interestingly, next week I've got the Swiss Digital Initiative on the podcast, so it's a nice link into the conversation next week.
Excellent.
So I think in terms of thinking about how to wrap things up, then, of the many conversations that you've had along this journey, and the insight that's given you, what can people who are listening, what can we do different? So if you were to leave 3 thoughts of, if anybody wanted to try and nudge the world in a slightly better place and help more people to feel more safe online, and maybe to kind of not quite juggle quite so many devices and quite so many platforms at the same time to provide their entertainment, what would you say? 3 things as thoughts to take away.
It's so difficult to pick out 3 things. So I think in the book I have a section for Generation Z itself, but actually, frankly, it applies to all of us because we're all as bad as each other. And in there, I talk about just taking stuff off your phone, and particularly off the front page of your phone. So we tend to look at what's on the front page of our phone. So if you just move off the front page, anything that you don't really need. So if it isn't your work email, and maybe if it isn't your telephone, but put it on the second page. So you actually have to make a conscious effort to go and find, say, Instagram or Snapchat or those kind of messaging and social media platforms. And then in your mind say, okay, I'm going to do that at a certain time of day or several times a day for a limited period, but don't have it on the front page. That's probably the biggest thing. And then I think the other big one we haven't talked about at all is the way technology attacks all the places that empathy develop. And one of those is the communal eating table. The decline of communal eating, and particularly uninterrupted group conversation, I think is something we should all be very concerned about. So just putting your phone away when you're sitting around a table having a meal. I know some parents are quite good at it. They sort of lock their kids' phones up in a Tupperware container or something for the length of the meal. I myself, although I can hear my wife laughing as I'm saying this, I just try and put the phone away from me, behind me, somewhere I can't see it. It might be in the same room, but I can't see the phone, and then I'm not tempted to pick it up at any point during the meal.
Sit on
everyone
it.
Else is.
Yes.
Sit or whatever. Yeah. So I think there's some stuff we can do ourselves. I fear that we shouldn't hold out too much hope of too much sort of self-regulation, either from the software designers or the companies. So I'm afraid that at the other end of the spectrum, we all need to support our governments in pushing through online safety legislation of the sort that we have in the UK, of the sort the Australians are pioneering with their e-safety commissioner,
Yeah.
of the sort, and you mentioned it in our pre-conversation before we started recording, that the Koreans have in relation to gaming. They simply turn off the internet for gaming between midnight and 6 a.m. It's actually illegal to game between midnight and 6 a.m. in some Asian countries, because their gaming addiction is at such a high level. So I think there isn't one thing, and not even three things. There are lots of things, and we all need to work together on it.
Bob, that's brilliant. And I will indeed take my laptop and play what you just said to my kids at the dinner table to reinforce them to not get their phone out as we try and eat dinner tonight. One last question. Is there a follow-up? Did the temptation, or did the effort that went into the book put you off writing another, or actually will you be tempted back?
I don't think it would be a book. What I would like to do is make the book, or make some of the themes of the book, into a documentary. So I don't know whether you've seen The Social Dilemma.
Yeah.
The Social Dilemma obviously tells the story of the attention economy in a pretty, stark and sensational way. But to my mind, the story was told by ex-tech executives. It didn't focus particularly on the voice of Generation Z itself. And more importantly, it left you at the end somewhat terrified without any clear idea of whether there might be some solutions. So what I'd like to do is make the follow-up documentary, which tells the story through the eyes of Generation Z. I have 5 characters in mind. There's the gaming addict, there's the person who's suffered self-esteem problems through overuse of social media, etc., but has also had good experience. So it's not all negative. It's the good and the bad of the internet, but the things to be aware of. And then at the end talks about some of the solutions and how, working together, we can build an internet that is good for us, not just good for people who sell eyeballs to advertisers.
Absolutely, and a great point to finish on. Bob, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.